part of what I want to look at today is this sense that we know what's going to happen in the Seder, because after all, it's called a Seder is called an order. But indeed, in the section that we're going to look at in this in these few weeks, the Maggid section, the sort of meat of the telling section of the Seder, I'm going to argue we actually don't really know what's going on with that order, and it's going to take some work to unpack. And that's what we're going to look at today. And so I want to look a little bit today at what I'm talking about, and to start off with that that poem, that song. Perhaps some of you sing it at your Seder, Kaddeish Urhatz, Kaddeish Urhatz. We're going to look at that in just a moment. And in my family, we had the tradition of every section that you arrive at, you sing the song up to that section. So if you get it to Karpas, Kaddeish Urhatz, Karpas, you just stop the song right there, and if you go over, you got to start the Seder again. So, so that's our sort of relationship to the song, which gives us the sense of we know where we're going. We're headed through a certain order, and we're marching along. But as we'll see, I think that song, that poem, which is relatively late to the game in terms of the Haggadah, gave us the particular sense of confidence about where we were, but it might be a little bit misplaced. Here's the poem. And it's a poem that appears first in the school of Rashi, like in France in the 13th century. But that's really the first time it appears. And as we're going to see, there are other poems that other people wrote throughout time that you might have recited instead of this poem. Some of them are very long and actually hard to remember. But let's just take a look at our poem and see what sort of assumptions our poem is making that's going to maybe be worth uncovering. Okay, so Kaddeish, Kiddush, Urhatz, and the washing. And this is, of course, the first of the two washings, the washing that precedes the vegetable, which our song calls karpas. Now, this is a great example of our song calls the vegetable eating karpas, which means parsley or celery. And that is a word actually for this dipping, for this vegetable course, that doesn't appear really in any mainstream text about this section of the Haggadah. It's sort of mentioned offhand in a couple of texts. It is a word that's used elsewhere in rabbinic literature, but fundamentally, it would probably be something like chasa, like lettuce, that you would use for this section. But we all know it as karpas because of the song. So in other words, the song is sometimes driving our understanding of what we're doing, and karpas being an example of that, sort of like a marginal use of a marginal vegetable that wasn't even available in many communities. In my family, we switched to potato at some point because nobody was having greens. In Russia at this time of the year. But karpas is what we know it as because of the song. And I'm just telling you, that's not the way that most people understood the vegetable. Yachatz is the breaking of the matzah. Now here's Maggid, right? Maggid is just one word among these 14 terms that sounds like, okay, we'll get through Maggid, then we'll move on to Rachsa. But of course, Maggid is the essence, the essential part of the Haggadah. It's the same word. But we get no information, no details about the structure of Maggid from this song. And then you move on through the list, Rachsa, Motzi, Matzah, which everybody loves. Now we're into the food, Maror, Korech, the Hallel sandwich, Shulchan Aruch, we finally made it to the meal. Safun, or in some versions, it says tamun, which means both of them mean hidden. That's where the apikomen comes out. Barech, that's Birkat Hamazon. And then you get also the term Hallel. And then the last term, Nirtzah, sort of means it was accepted. Like it's not actually a thing. I mean, we sort of associate with those Chad Gadya songs at the end, but really the end of the Seder is Hallel. And if you were just to read the poem here, you would think and assume that Hallel comes at the end. But as we're going to see, Hallel actually does not come only at the end. Hallel is unusually split into two halves. And if you were just paying attention to the poem, you wouldn't really notice that part of that structural aspect of Hallel. We're going to return to that in just a moment, but I just want to show you another poem, just so you can see that this wasn't the only poem that was out there. So this comes from Sefer Abu Draham. Those of you who studied with me before, we've used Abu Draham in the past. David Abu Draham, 13th century Spain. He goes through the entire Siddur, the entire Machzor, the entire Haggadah, all of those texts, and connects the liturgy that we have in those texts to the Bible. And in addition, he brings other traditions and laws. And here he's telling you, well, this is a poem. He actually brings a couple of poems that he recites for his order of the Seder. Some of these are, sort of parallel terms. He's after the poem that we just saw. So some of them are overlapping. Yikdash, Yitar, Tahor is what happens when you wash your hands, you become pure. Karpas, there's our term again. V'chatzei, and you break it in half like the achatz. Vidoresh, that's his Magid. Vidoresh, we'll see that's a term that we're going to see from the Mishnah. Vidoresh, to expound, okay, as opposed to tell, lahagid. And then you're on to the food. Notel, that's netilat yadayim. Lechem umatzah. We know that lechem is just hamotzi lechem, not real bread. And matzah, so those are the blessings. And then you have maror and korech as normal. Ve'ochel prusa, you eat enough to satisfy your obligation. V'naki is amen, and then you should, in cleanliness, do your zimun, your birkat hamazon. Yehalel, there's our Hallel again. You should sing Hallel b'ditza, with joy. And that's the end of the Seder. So sort of, again, in this poem, it's even clearer than ours, because Nirtza sort of sneaks in at the end in our poem. But here, Yehalel b'ditza, Hallel is the culmination of where we're headed and what we're actually going to be doing. But again, here, if all you had was the poem, you would assume that Hallel is its own independent and freestanding unified section that comes at the end. Whereas we're going to see and need to be reminded perhaps that Hallel actually is split into two parts. And where we split it exactly is already an old debate. But just if we were sort of trying to figure out, okay, what is the Doresh section? What is the Maggid section made up of? I actually want to start from the end of the Maggid section, which is the beginning of Hallel. So even though the poem doesn't say that Hallel is split in two, indeed, that's how it's structured in our Seder. Okay, so let's take a look at why you might split Hallel into two. Now, just a word about Hallel. Hallel are those 6 psalms, Psalm 113 to 118, that you recite on festivals. Nowadays, we recite it on Rosh Chodesh, but in the original understanding of Hallel, you really would only recite it actually 18 times a year. This is the only time we recite it at night. And like Sukkot was the real holiday of Hallel. That's where you do it all of the length of the holiday. Pesach, although we do it now a half Hallel on the end days of Pesach and the middle days of Pesach. Originally, Hallel was really just the beginning of Pesach, was when you recite it, and is related to the Pesach offering, as we're going to see in a moment. Okay, so first of all, let's just understand why might we split Hallel into two sections. So we learned this sort of by the by in a Mishnah, old rabbinic text, that describes the differences between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. So we know that on the 15th of Nisan, we have Pesach Rishon. That's our Pesach in the month of Nisan. But if you missed it because you were tameh, because you were impure, or for other reasons, you could make it up a month later, and that's called Pesach Sheni. So the Mishnah already describes, this appears in the Torah, but the Mishnah describes what's the difference between those two holidays, and then they enumerate some of them, including, a major boon of Pesach Sheni. You don't actually have to clear your house of chametz. Pesach Rishon, you can't see or have any chametz in your house, but in Pesach Sheni, you're allowed to have chametz in your house. And then comes our important line, Harishon, ta'un Hallel ba'achilato. The main Pesach, the first Pesach, Pesach Rishon, you do need Hallel while you are eating the Pesach. That is to say, eating the Pesach sacrifice and Hallel are intimately intertwined. But that's not true on Pesach Sheni. And so you can sort of separate them. You don't have to eat while saying Hallel. And then finally, Zeh v'zeh, but in both Pesach Rishon, Pesach Sheni, you need Hallel when you are making the Pesach. And we'll see that in a second. Hallel was not only recited upon eating the sacrifice, it was also recited upon the performance of the sacrifice, the preparation as we're headed into Pesach as well. Okay, so just note, again, by the by, we learn on Pesach Rishon, our Pesach, the main Pesach, Ta'un Hallel ba'achilata. We need Hallel. We need to sing Hallel when eating it. Okay, so if you were to strip away everything else from the Seder, and as we're going to see as we move through our learning together, this was probably the original, what it meant to celebrate Pesach at night was essentially two main things. Number one was the Pesach sacrifice. That was the meat that you were going to eat on Seder night. And that was encased with a recitation of Hallel. That is to say, it was sort of the kind of meal that you would have was a meal of praise, and you were eating while performing Hallel. Now, we never perform Hallel at night. We never perform it while we're eating. It's a morning service that you perform with all the other rituals that you do in the liturgy in the morning. And the exception is Seder night. But if you think of what was the original Pesach experience, what was the original Seder as we've come to know it, it was really eating this special sacrifice with your group and saying Hallel as you eat it. Now, as we know, you can't actually chew and swallow and sing at the same time. And so you could imagine a situation in which they say, well, okay, what does it mean to have Hallel while you're eating it? Well, let's wrap the eating with different components of Hallel. Okay, so you could imagine a way in which you say, all right, Hallel is 6 Psalms. So we have to figure out how many Psalms we say before the eating and how many Psalms we say after the eating. But fundamentally, we're going to divide those Psalms, put the eating in the middle, and that's the structure of what we're having with this celebratory evening. Now, again, Hallel, as I mentioned, is sort of an essential part of Pesach night, perhaps even the most essential part of Seder night. We got a little statement from Rav said the name Rabbi Chia that the Pesach sacrifice, even if you just had a little olive's worth of the Pesach sacrifice, the Hallel, Hallela, Paka Igra, that would break the roof. And you can see here, like, what would I do on Seder night? I'd eat a little bit because maybe there were a lot of people to eat the Pesach sacrifice, so I only got a little bit. But the Hallel was really the thing that brought the house down, as it were, that broke the roof. So eating and Hallel as sort of like your original core of what it might mean to experience Seder night. And finally, we'll just look at this tradition that they had of not only saying Hallel when you're eating, but also when you were preparing the lambs in the sacrificial moment before Pesach began. And what the scene that is described in the Mishnah essentially is that the people who were slaughtering the lambs were surrounded by other people, perhaps Levites, perhaps regular Israelites, who were singing Hallel. So there was a Hallel that was connected to the sacrifice even in the preparation. And they would sing Hallel. They would go through the cycle of Psalms as many times as it took to prepare the lamb. They would sing it a first time, and if they weren't finished, they would sing it a second time. And if they needed to, they would sing it a third time. But then we get a testimony that they never even needed to sing it a third time because they were so efficient in slaughtering the lamb. But what you see here is that Hallel and the lamb and the eating of the lamb, both the preparation and the eating of it, are intimately connected. And that in some ways is sort of the core essence of what we're doing in the meal on Seder night, which you wouldn't know if all you had was the poem. So again, what we're trying to understand as we move our way through this learning is what is the order of Maggid, and I'm just highlighting for you that the word Maggid doesn't even capture it, because what we're really, and the poem that says Hallel at the end doesn't capture it, because the Hallel is actually at the beginning and the end of the meal. And we're going to make our way and learn more about the structure of what we're actually doing on Seder night, hopefully for our own Seder enjoyment.